Well, this afternoon we will be looking at Mark, also known as John. John was his real name. Maybe real is not the right word. John seems to have been his Hebrew name, Mark being his Greek name or Roman name, Marcos, or I guess closer to what we would, in English, Marcus would be his name, which, this is rare, I guess. Talk about differences in possible meaning. A large hammer? No clue. I didn't look that much into it, to be honest. Or polite, or a defense. Found that's an extra one. No clue which one is most probable. But Mark was a Christian man, young Christian man it seems, and a Bible writer. He is the writer of the gospel that we call the Gospel of Mark. He was the son of a certain Mary, one of the multiple Marys of the New Testament. We learn that from Acts 12:12. That's the first time we meet Mark, by name at least. He was also a close relative of Barnabas. Cousin, maybe. Uncle, perhaps. Something else, possibly. The word is kind of elastic as it goes. But his legacy really, he joined Paul and Barnabas in Jerusalem, and only to leave them prematurely and go back home during their first missionary journey, but who afterward ultimately redeemed himself. So Mark is the man who recovered himself, according to the author of the book we're using here. He's found only in Acts 12, other than verse 12, the very last verse of chapter 12, and then in chapter 13, until he reappears later in chapter 15. We'll see that a little bit. And then his name is mentioned subsequently in 3 other passages. But those are the only times Mark is mentioned. But he is a man who's worthy of considering because of the story that surrounds him. And we will do our best to keep this about Mark and not turn this into a discussion about Paul and Barnabas. Is that okay, Joe?
Just don't skip Colossians.
Don't skip. Well, I don't plan on skipping Colossians, but I guess you'll enlighten us when we get to Colossians, or okay. Good, because I don't know what you're referring to. But young Mark, okay? I say young. We don't really know how old he was. But the things that we do know, his mother, Mary, was a faithful Christian woman. By Acts 12 anyway. We don't know very much about her background. It has been suggested that she was Barnabas' sister, and hence the relation. No, we have no way to know if that's accurate or not. It very well may not be the case, but she was a Christian woman who was apparently pretty well off because she had a house that was big enough to accommodate a decent group of Christians gathering together to pray for Peter when Peter was in prison. On the occasion whenever the angel came and let him out, there was a group of Christians praying together in Mary's house, who was Mark's mother. So that's, other than the fact that his mother was a faithful Christian woman, leads us to believe that by the way, she also had a servant girl, so that kind of shows she was well-to-do. But we can assume maybe that he had a godly upbringing, maybe in a Jewish home. But his connection with Barnabas, which is not mentioned until, is that the one in Colossians? Is that where it says? I think Colossians 4:10 is where he's called the something of Barnabas, cousin. Like I said, that word is sort of flexible. So,
But that verse also is a pleading with the people to accept Mark when he comes.
okay,
So Paul was giving him recommendation and saying, I think he's saying he did come from a cousin of Barnabas, but you guys be nice to him
yeah.
in Colossians. So there are a lot of people upset with Mark.
That is a total. They also said, he said receive almost everybody that he was sending places. And by no stretch does that mean that there were many people mad at Mark in any way, shape, or form. But he does say you received instructions to welcome him. I think he said the same thing about...
He did Philemon. Anybody who needed to be accepted back in, Paul pleaded for.
not back in. It doesn't say accept him back in. It says receive him when he comes there. He's not telling them to welcome him back into the church. He's telling them to welcome him there when he arrives, if he arrives there at Colossae. But before we get to that, so Mark, verse 25, Acts 12:25. He joins them. He lived in Jerusalem. That's where his mother lived. That's where he seems to be living. Whether he lives there still, we don't know. Probably, maybe. But verse 25, Barnabas and Saul were at Jerusalem, and they left there to go back to Antioch. And on that occasion, they took Mark with them. So they're in Jerusalem. Mark joins them and to Antioch. And it was at this time, in Acts 13, that Paul and Barnabas are going to begin their first journey. So we're not really told or reminded that Mark was with them until he decides he's leaving. So the beginning of that mission takes place. They are sent out by the Holy Spirit. They go through to Cyprus, and they go on to, and this is where they meet the magician, Elymas. And Paul rebuked him, called him a son of the devil, and so on. Mark seems to have been there with him all this time, with them, up to this point. But when they get to Pamphylia and Perga, John leaves them. It doesn't even call him Mark there, but the fact that Luke calls him John in verse 25 of chapter 12, and then says whose other name was Mark, it just stands to reason that the John of chapter 13, verse 13 is Mark, John Mark. So he leaves, and we learn this later that it was him subsequently. So we're not given any information about the reason he left. We're not really told anything except he left, went back to Jerusalem. He went back home. But they kept going. So Luke doesn't give us any details, doesn't say that they were upset with him, doesn't say anything like that up to this point, okay? All we're told is suddenly he went home. Doesn't even say that he decided that he was going to go home or anything like that. It just says, just matter of fact, John left them and returned to Jerusalem. Yep.
The Greek word used was deserted, not just.
Okay.
That's a little strong, but that's okay.
The Greek word that Luke uses, you're saying, is the word for deserted? That remains to be seen. He departed from them. The word means to go away or depart. Go on one's way, separate oneself, go out, depart from someone. So it doesn't have to mean desert. It's not inherent in the word that any malice is intended or desertion in that way. What we subsequently learn later, when we get to chapter 15, Mark doesn't appear again until Barnabas and Paul are ready to go again. And this is chapter 15, beginning in verse 36. But verse 37 says, Barnabas wanted to take John called Mark. Again. And Paul said no. Now, the fact that Barnabas wanted to take Mark seems to me an absolute implication that he wanted to go. Otherwise, I don't know why Barnabas would have brought it up. If it had been left at, Mark left last time, why in the world would he want to go again? Something led Barnabas to think that Mark was a good candidate to go again. And as far as I'm concerned, the thing that makes most sense is it's simply because he wanted to. He wanted to go again. So the text doesn't explicitly say that he wanted to go, but that seems to be the most natural reason why Barnabas would have put his name forward again, considering what happened last time. And Paul didn't want to. Therefore, Barnabas was so passionate about this that he decided to go with Mark by himself. So Mark goes, Barnabas does take Mark. He was not going to let Mark be left behind, so much so that he's parted ways with Paul. So Paul takes Silas instead. Okay, so Paul and Silas go back, or go. Barnabas and Mark actually go the way that, the original plan was, let's go back the path that we went before and see how the brethren are doing. That's what Barnabas and Mark actually did. They're the ones that did the thing that was the original plan to go back through, because they went to Cyprus, and that was the first way. Paul and Silas went another way. They went north. They didn't go on a ship to go to Cyprus. They started traveling north by foot or whatever. So the reason we don't know anything about Mark and Barnabas's trip is because Luke went with Paul. He meets with Paul in Troas on this journey. So we talked about the we's and the they's and them's and the we's and us in chapter 16. Well, Paul and Silas get to Troas in verse 8 of chapter 16. So the reason that the narrative follows Paul and Silas is because of Luke. Has nothing to do with the success or lack thereof of Mark and Barnabas' journey or trip. It's because Luke was with Paul. And so he fills in the gaps of, okay, they came to Derbe and Lystra, and then they eventually got to Troas, and that's when Luke gets with them. So the only thing that we can assume, I think it's not fair to assume anything except that Barnabas and Mark did exactly what Barnabas set out to do. They went and checked on the brethren there and to see how they were doing, just like he suggested in verse 36. But it's the later mentions of Mark that tells the story to me, and that is the fact that he's mentioned again in, like we said, Colossians 4. Paul wrote Colossians. And in Colossians 4, he is now, if not physically with Paul, he is with him in work. He is Paul's co-worker again, because he's brought up. Aristarchus greets you, and Mark, the cousin or nephew or whatever of Barnabas. And, let's just say for the sake of argument that Joe's point was correct. The reason the instructions had to be given to them about Mark was because they were mad at Mark. Okay? Again, there's not a single drop of anything that suggests that. But even if it did, look who the man was who gave them those instructions. Paul. Paul, the one who before refused to have him on board. Now, either way, Mark is here again. And Paul is sending him places. He is utilizing him to the work, which shows that Mark redeemed himself. He proved himself to be worthy. He proved himself to be a valuable worker, which, in retrospect, in my opinion, I'll say, proves Barnabas right in Acts 15. Because the fact that Mark is now useful, which I think were Paul's exact words in 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy 4, verse 11. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry. So the fact that Mark is now, Paul even admits, is very useful to the point where I need you to make sure to bring Mark, proves that whatever Barnabas did with him helped to bring him back around to useful service. Yeah, Wayne?
If Barnabas was right the first time, Paul had to be wrong then. And I can't see Paul being wrong in denying him to go.
Well, it seems that something happened between then and later that Mark, in Paul's estimation, was not useful and to now being useful. So I don't know. All we know is what we're told. So it seems something happened, and I can't see it any other way than if Barnabas hadn't taken Mark with him, then Mark's progression would not have went that way. It wouldn't have gone that way. And so, right or wrong, I'm thankful for Mark's sake that Barnabas chose him, even to the point of the fact that, here's the thing. The fact that Barnabas was willing to part ways with Paul for Mark's sake, to me suggests that at least Barnabas thought Paul was wrong. Now, whether he was wrong, each person will have to decide for himself. But Barnabas seems to have thought Paul was in the wrong, and that's why Barnabas was willing to say, I'm taking Mark, whether you come or not. So I'm taking Mark, and the fact that Barnabas and Mark are the two that actually went and did what they brought up, shows that basically Paul just refused to go with Barnabas and Mark, and instead he wanted to go. He went somewhere else. Yeah, Joe.
Well, see, I don't like the words right or wrong, and I think churches have to go through the same, and families have to go through the same. Whenever discipline is needed, it's, sometimes the father takes the hard nose, and the mother goes, okay, come over here and I'll nurture you back where you need to go. It took both of them to keep Mark in the straight and narrow. Discipline is necessary. I mean, how did he say? He would desert or don't have anything to do with his brother, turn him over to Satan so that he might learn to, that's what he says in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah.
I think I see Paul thinking that that's what needed to be done. Now, like some people spank their children. Other people put them in a corner and say, stay down until they come out. Discipline is not easy, but it's necessary to correct a course.
Yes, the difference is Mark hadn't done anything sinful.
Anybody who puts his hand to the plow and turns back is not worthy of the kingdom. I do think our Lord said that.
Okay, is that what Mark did?
Well, he turned back.
He turned back. So he went back home to Jerusalem. He was under no obligation to go on a missionary journey
Most of the
across Asia.
that I have read said that the word meant deserted and left people in the lurch, which could have left a lot of hard feelings with a lot of the people who were involved with that.
Yeah, it could have, yeah.
That's what the commentaries lend themselves to me to say.
I would
But
challenge them to say in what way that word inherently means that. Sounds like they're reading into it a little bit, just by the word depart or left.
most of them are dead, you probably won't get to ask them the question.
I'm not going to try, but I just said I would. The point is, he went home, he left. So I guess we don't have all the details about how much he was involved in vowing to go, and maybe, Luke doesn't really tell us that Mark was like begging and saying, I promise I won't go back, I promise I'll stay with you the whole time, or anything like that. They just took him with them, and and then he left early. He decided to go back home. Now, I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, but it is hardly to be compared with, a man who's, sleeping with his stepmother, like in 1 Corinthians 5, and deliver that man to Satan. So my point with Mark's character arc, if you will, is it seems clear that he wanted a second chance. And you talk about how I remember the Lord saying, put your hand to the plow and turn back. I remember Paul saying a whole lot about restoring brethren, giving them the second chance, and so on. Well, he didn't then. And Barnabas was the one, ironically, just like he did with Paul, when nobody else would take Paul in, it was Barnabas who was there to take him under his wing. Now, Barnabas is seeing Paul do the exact same thing that people were doing to him, and Barnabas seems to me to be the one that's being consistent here in his behavior and taking Mark under his wing. And the outcome of that seems to have been success in Mark's spiritual life, because now Paul does want him with him. He does use him for service. He does have him doing things, at the time in 2 Timothy 4, and this is near Paul's death, he says, Luke is the only one that's still here with me, but I want you to get Mark so he'll be here with me too. That's moving to me. That's powerful, to say the least. But Mark thankfully got his second chance, and he seems to have lived up to it. So he makes people. He's not perfect. Should he have stayed with them, or should he have? Was he right to go back home? I think the argument could very well be made. Obviously, it would have been better if he had stayed with Paul and Barnabas in that first trip. So he messed up, but now he has come back around and proven himself. He's not going home early anymore, and I think he has Barnabas to thank for that.
Who hasn't made wrong choices in their life? The thing is to learn from that and do better.
Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, you had to be given the chance to do better. Yeah, and that's why I see Barnabas' line of thought more consistent with scriptural teaching in that particular instance, because he wanted the second chance. The only way he could grow is by being given the chance to grow, and Barnabas gave him that chance. So the same thing that we say about Paul in Acts 9 about hey, if Barnabas hadn't been there, look at how differently Saul's life may have gone, his Christian life. Because the Christians at Jerusalem didn't want anything to do with him. Barnabas said, come here, tell me all about it. And then took him to the apostles and pleaded his case for him, backed him up. Now here we are. Paul didn't want anything to do with Mark. Barnabas took him, said, I'm here for you, brother. Let's go. And Paul didn't want to go. He didn't go with them. I've actually never really noticed that element of it until now, that Barnabas and Mark are the ones that went on the trip that was planned. And Paul, since he was taking Mark, said, no, I'm not going. And he and Silas went the other way. But, okay.
We're not
Yep.
given enough information, but Paul had to have a reason for his decision.
Yeah.
And since there's far more known about Paul than there is about Barnabas, I lean towards Paul.
Well, Paul's reason was that he left them before. That was his reason.
And that's sufficient reason. He's weak at that point. He needed a second chance for which he got.
Yeah.
And with that, he proved himself. Most of us like or want a second chance when we foul up. And somebody hopefully will be there to help give us that chance.
Mm-hmm.
You know what?
And it was Barnabas. Yeah.
We look at a few verses here and a few verses there, and especially in the book of Acts. But when you look at how many years those verses cover, I mean, how many of us looking in hindsight might have made a different decision? How many of us looking in hindsight, looking at, I would have done it then, just like I did it? I mean, you don't know. But like Wayne was saying, it took all of them to get the plan of God to others.
Mm-hmm.
So God uses everyone the way He needs them. He has to fix a few messes, which He fixes a lot of messes. But God is the one, I thought this morning, when you're talking about suffering, it's long suffering that He's been with us.
Yeah.
Because it takes us a long time to figure stuff out.
Yep. And again, Mark seems to have been young. It is believed that Peter and Mark had a connection with each other as well. I will say, the reason I left 1 Peter, where is it? 1 Peter 3 or 5:13 mentions a Mark. I do not think that it is clear by any means that that is the same as John Mark. Some assume that it is, and it very well may be. The language of 1 Peter 5:13 to me, when Peter says, Mark my son, that to me sounds like he's actually talking about his actual son. Now that's just my opinion. It's not like Paul talking about Timothy, my child in the faith. He says, she who is at Babylon sends you greetings, and so does Mark my son. I mean, that to me just sounds like he's talking about his son. We know Peter was married, so we know he was an elder, which he says in verse 1 of chapter 5. Therefore, the Mark in 1 Peter 5, to me, seems like it's his son, which it would not be John Mark. But at any rate, it is thought, some have suggested, that the mysterious young man in Mark chapter 14, Mark mentions something that the others don't. It sort of just comes out of nowhere. Verse 50 says, they all left him and fled. But then Mark throws this in there. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, and he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. Where'd that come from? Weird. That has led some people to believe that young man was Mark himself. Now, take it or leave it. 50-50 chance, I guess, as far as that goes, whether or not that young man was Mark. I guess maybe just the fact that Mark mentioned it when the others didn't is not really a hugely strong case that it's Mark. But it could have been. Could have been. Very well. All he had was a linen cloth on him, and then he pulled a Joseph when they grabbed him and shook that cloth off, except he didn't have anything else on. So, probably not the greatest time for him, but anyway. Maybe that was Mark, maybe it wasn't. Can't really say much about.
Imagine it being his most embarrassing moment. So yeah, you'd remember that.
Yeah. Not only did he run away too, but he had to run away naked.
He was in a hurry.
Yeah. He took off and he's like, well, I should have worn more clothes tonight. But anyway, we don't know if that was Mark or not, but just the fact that it's only in Mark's record has led some to believe that maybe Mark was, a sidekick at that time already. Of course, that probably also ties him in with Peter, which again, I'll just say a lot of people believe that Mark got his information from Peter, which may be in part because they assume that 1 Peter 5:13 is talking about John Mark. So there's probably some interwoven assumptions in there, but at any rate, we know Mark wrote ultimately he wrote the Gospel of Mark. Number 1, lessons from Mark. The blessings of a godly home are invaluable. We talked about his mother, Mary. She was a Christian woman. She was, I'm sure, a faithful woman before Christ, before becoming a Christian. And so, whatever Mark was, we don't only owe to Barnabas and the other brethren that helped him, but don't forget his mom. Don't know anything about his dad. Seemingly dead at this point. But he benefited from the blessings of a godly home. And hopefully we have too, or at least help others to benefit. Number 2, much depends on one's choice of friends. Mark's life was lived in the company of godly men like Peter, Paul, Barnabas. And look how much that helped him. Just like Timothy. Paul, they took him under his wing. They took Mark under their wing as well and helped him to be the man that he needed to be. As long as that may have taken. Number 3, the possibilities of life are beyond comprehension. Here's the son of a widow. Fairly young man. All of a sudden, he's a companion to an apostle, and Barnabas, who's also called an apostle in his own way, missionary, great historian. He wrote the Gospel of Mark, the short one. He wrote the short one, the action movie gospel that just, Jesus did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. Immediately he went and did this, and immediately, that's Mark's gospel. And then, finally, number 4, there is great reward for faithful service. We kind of talked about that, covered that this morning. But we don't read a single sermon that Mark ever preached. Not one miracle, probably because he didn't have the power to perform miracles as far as we know. But we do read about him helping others. He went on that journey. I'm sure he had parts to play. Even that first journey when he left early. That's not to say that he wasn't a helpful companion up until that point. And we know ultimately now the rewards have been fully realized, almost, if not fully. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Paul said, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." Luke 6:23, your reward is great in heaven. Luke 6:35, love your enemies, do good, lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. You'll be called sons of the Most, or you will be sons of the Most High. So, faithful service has great reward. Like Mark, I'm sure we can all point to times or look back at times when the choice we made was not ideal. But like Mark seems to have done, we should seek a second chance, redemption, which implies remorse. He He felt bad for what he did before, and he wanted another chance. And he seized it when offered to him, and he didn't fail the next time.